All right, so I'm just going to give us a few seconds because I think people will sort of, as we started presenting, people will kind of join in. So we'll give it just a few seconds for that to happen.
Sure.
Okay, so why don't we get started? I want to thank everybody who's out there for joining us for this webinar. I'm personally actually very interested to hear what our this webinar is going to be recorded, so it is being recorded, and it's going to be available on demand. So also to know that links that are a couple of websites that are on this. The audience can ask questions for us. So I think in your sort of presenter here, sorry, can you guys hear me now? Is my mic okay now? Yeah, no, okay. Not
I cannot really hear you properly. Just after a short period of time.
Yep.
All right. Let's take this. I'll try and go to my AirPods.
It sounds like that might be the thing.
Oh, maybe it grabbed. Maybe my AirPods. Can you hear me better now?
Totally.
Okay, so my AirPods grabbed it. That's annoying. That seems like a flaw. Okay, so anyway, so now you guys can ask, the audience can ask questions throughout. So I think there's a spot where there's, where you can type in questions. What we're going to do is, as those accumulate, we'll go and see if there are any that we can answer at the end of the presentation. And so again, I want to just thank you for joining us for this panel discussion, which is entitled From Affect to Effect, Unlocking the Power of Emotion AI. So real quickly, I'm going to do some introductions. My name is Tim Oates. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Synaptiq. I'm also a professor in the Computer Science and Electrical Engineering Department at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I got a PhD in Computer Science from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I spent a year as a postdoc at MIT in the AI lab before I came to UMBC, and I've been there ever since. And as a co-founder of Synaptiq and in other capacities, I've got a lot of experience consulting in a diverse set of industries. One of our guests today is Scott Sandland. He's the founder and CEO at Cyrano.ai. Scott is the former world's youngest hypnotherapist, which I'm hoping we hear a little bit more about today. A few companies and decades later, he's the CEO of a company that's currently focusing on artificial empathy and strategic linguistics. As a former executive director of a mental health clinic and a longtime technologist, he's published numerous peer-reviewed journals in Psychology Today, Forbes, and Entrepreneur Magazine, and others. Scott has presented his AI work at the United Nations AI for Global Good Conference and is a frequent guest lecturer at various universities. We also have David Van Wie. He's the founder and chief investment officer of Aventurine. He has led and advised companies from founding to exit. David's operating experience and investment background span multiple markets driven by innovation and rapid technological change. He is named on over 200 issued patents and published applications, which have generated billions of dollars in royalties through licensing relationships with leading global businesses. So as you can see, our panel of two people is actually quite diverse and pretty interesting. So let's get going. So one of the most difficult aspects of AI, I think, is understanding or expressing human emotion. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is in a minute. Some industries, advertising, mental health care, automotive, to name a few, are already leveraging emotion AI to great effect. So what is emotion AI? The topic of our panel discussion today. Essentially, emotion AI describes machines or programs that interpret or respond to human affect. It can analyze factors like tone of voice, facial expression, body language, the things that you and I pay attention to every day to determine what a person or a group of people feel. Then it can respond with the appropriate emotional content. So if you smile, then the AI might smile back at you, and it gets much more subtle than that. So, one question is, why is this hard? And I think, at least for my mind, I've been doing research in AI for many years now. Anything that humans do effortlessly is hard for computers to do. So, think about processing the world visually, interacting with the physical world, using natural language. We don't have an algorithm in our head for doing it, and so those things tend to be very hard to mimic. However, emotion's not an AI panacea. When I was a postdoc at MIT is when the Spielberg film AI came out, and they did a screening in the AI lab. And in the movie, there's a scene where this, scientist says, I've figured out how to crack the AI nut, and the secret is I know how to imbue emotion in the machine. And interestingly, the entire audience broke out laughing, which was not what I was expecting. But the thing that they were laughing at was that AI is not that simple, right? It's not just emotion isn't the key to AI, but it is a really important element of humans interacting with machines. So businesses can integrate that capability into customer-facing apps, platforms like Zoom and other internal systems. The potential is boundless, limitless, bound only by the ingenuity of AI software developers. At Synaptiq, where I'm the co-founder and the chief scientist, we've worked with clients to build emotion AI into apps for the purposes of enhanced cybersecurity. We've also helped clients use this technology in customer service, marketing, and healthcare, to name a few areas. So one of our speakers, Scott, will talk about emotion AI and its application for mental health support, as well as work productivity and HR. So in the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to unpack the following. What does it take to develop sound emotion AI models? How to use AI to improve soft skills and interpersonal interactions, where emotion AI is already perhaps successfully at work, and which organizational silos industries benefit for the most. And then, as I said, there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So, okay, that's enough of me talking. Now let's get the panel involved. So to help the audience get a better understanding of your backgrounds and interest in the topic, we'll start with a simple question, which is, when did you first come across emotion AI, and what about it interested or inspired you? So Scott, can we start with you maybe?
Sure. So for me, I found it as the executive director of a mental health clinic. You know, we were serving at-risk teens, troubled adolescents, drug rehab centers, that kind of work. And what I found was I felt like a garbage man. Like I felt like I was getting there too late and cleaning things up, and I wanted to get in front of things at scale. And I realized that teenagers and increasingly everybody trusts their phone more than they trust people. And so I started looking at ways we could access kids earlier by giving them technological tools. And what I found was overwhelmingly AI was driven in the direction of complete accurate responses and very correct answer, data science driven stuff. And it was missing empathy. And to me, effective communication is about targeting your message. And it felt like that was really lacking. So I looked at it as an opportunity to start growing in that space. And I just saw this sort of zigzag thing where everyone was moving at, let's get better frequently asked question interfaces, and not let's learn how to tailor what we're saying for the audience. And that's really what I see the big piece being. And so the goal for my company is to build an AI therapist that we can deploy for cost-ish to every teenager and put it on their phone.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. David, what about you?
Well, I don't have quite the same kind of backstory there. I was a founder and the chief executive of an internet communications company that was trying to solve some of the problems of remote work, some of the things that we've now all encountered, but this was back in 2007. And one of the things that we we're working on were simulations of individuals. So right now we're using webcams and sending images directly, but there's real advantages, as we've seen from time to time in our professional lives, of not having to be on a soundstage, but actually be able to engage in work. And that one of the thoughts we had about that, we're using synthetic humans, and we ran into the problems of that Maury encountered around the so-called uncanny valley, and all of the real challenges that go into having a simulated human that's not just auditory or text-based, but visual as well. And that one of the resolutions of that would be a better job of both capturing and communicating emotion. That if you were able to have the avatar understand the emotional state, you could actually overcome much of the simulation issue. So I became fascinated by two things. One, the impact that an emotion AI would have, because I saw people simulate it with video, and then the impossibility really of computing it with the known algorithms and systems of the time. And one of the things that's really been fascinating to me about current research, including that Scott and his colleague Dan Paris at Cyrano have done, is they've really proposed some new approaches to that, where I'm really seeing for the first time computable emotion AI that would have a practical application, where you could really see how an application developer could immediately take advantage of it. And so that's I think the excitement of the present day is that some of those technologies are really maturing.
Okay, great. So the next question you've touched on a little bit, but maybe we can get you to augment just a bit. And that is, humans interpret and act on emotional content every day. But the question is, what role can emotion play for organizations and other sort of non-human entities, for example? So what do you see as the biggest challenges that organizations or industries or even society face that emotion AI is particularly well suited to tackle, right? What's the sweet spot? So David, do you mind starting us out on that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to mention a couple that I think come to mind right away. I think you alluded to one of them earlier, which is, I think when you're looking to simulate an interaction with a human being, that the customer service and sales world is one where automation goes a long way. Those are processes that cost companies a lot of money. And so to the extent that you can really amplify the abilities of the people you are employing to cover more ground, there's just I think a ton of advantage there. There's another area, though, I think that can be overlooked in business, which is, yes, it's great to have simulated human interaction, but one of the other things that is true about AIs is that they're very patient. So as an organization, if you have a large trove of material, say a transcript, or you might have some documents, one of the things I think that an emotion AI can help you do is synthesize and understand the content of that type of information in a way that, again, you'll really radically improve the efficiency of people who are trying to understand a large trove of transcripts or a large trove of historical documents. If you're able to bring some linguistic tools to bear that help you understand the full picture, which includes the emotional content. I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating about the Cyrano technology is that they've taken some steps in that direction already.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, Scott, what about you?
So to piggyback off that, I mean, when you think about what's happened in the technological disruption of retail in the last, call it decade, right? Like ultimately, Amazon, I don't know if you guys heard, Amazon won. Like Amazon is everywhere for a reason, and because it's a good customer experience. Like it's frictionless. It knows what I want. It serves it to me. It gets here tomorrow. There's a lot of benefits to it. And I think you can comp that across to other verticals. An easy one being telehealth. And telehealth is absolutely having a moment right now with COVID, of course. But when you look at it in terms of patient outcomes, when you look at it in terms of using emotional AI to have better chairside manner, better rapport, better relationships with those people that really need that help, you can arm, physicians, mental health professionals, crisis counselors, et cetera, with resources to relate better, to connect better with people across the planet. So I see that being an absolute piece. And whether that be sort of a exoskeleton, heads-up display, cobot kind of piece that's augmenting humans, or if you see it as a tool that can replace humans at certain layers, especially earlier, so that your scope of practice is smart. I think there's a real opportunity there. Of course, in customer service and things like that, it makes sense as well. But to me, I think the way it works is going back to Amazon. What Amazon does is segments people based on behavior. And they say people who like this, like that, people who buy that, buy that. And it's not one-dimensional. It's that the constellation of all your purchase history, or in Google's case, your search history, the constellation of all those data points make it a pretty specific targeted sale, which allows you to have a very personal experience. And I think as we get enough data sets and we get the right kinds of data sets labeled properly, it means that a lot more industries will be able to create personal experiences for each user, end user at scale. And that is incredibly disruptive. And the idea, like, we call these things personal computers, but mine looks a lot like yours. And the idea that we could make this thing actually personal, and it would respond based on my mental state, my historical preferences, my psychographic profile, is now becoming a reasonable thing to say. And I'm not talking about changing your desktop background, right? You know, like the way the thing interacts with you is meaningful.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, so I personally had the experience yesterday of calling the customer service at a large corporation, and I've often found that these phone trees never take you where you want to go, and I get frustrated, and the frustration is there obviously in my voice, and the system never knows it. And I've even found that sort of the more agitated I get, and not that I get agitated very often, the worse the speech recognition gets, right? Whereas a human would be, okay, I understand you're getting frustrated. Even that simple application I'd like to see. So, okay. So I think what you've both talked about is some of the sort of promise of it. What do you see as the challenges in whatever direction you want to go? It could be technical challenges, but if that vision is going to be realized, what's hard about it today? And, you know, Scott, I know you said just a minute ago that we could actually be thinking about this now, but what are the hard things that remain? So maybe do you want to follow up on that?
So to me, the first hard piece, I mean, there's the social impact stuff and people getting used to it. And I think that's actually kind of easy. I think increasingly people under 40 for sure are really comfortable with tech. And I think that number goes up, you know, pretty quickly. So I don't think that's as hard as people lay it out. I think adoption's pretty good when it works. And I don't think people are worried about data mining very much. I think people are more upset when their data is misused or when they're incorrectly targeted. And when it makes their situation better, I think they're pretty comfortable with it. Privacy matters, of course, and security matters, of course. But I think the main challenge is a technical one, where it's about labeling the data properly. There's that old expression, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right names. And to me, like, AI is incredible at chess. And we all know that, and that's just assumed it's the best. And that's because it understands how all the pieces work. And what we're doing right now in the human experience, especially in linguistics, but in a lot of aspects of trying to make emotional AI, is we have data scientists saying, okay, how can I just make this as simple as possible in like a sentiment analysis layer? Yeah. But then what you're doing is saying, okay, let's just take sentiment analysis and entity mapping and throw that into a convolutional neural network, do some deep learning on it, and see what comes out. And that's basically like trying to teach the robot how to play chess, but only teaching it about 5 of the pieces. Yeah. And so going, hey, we gave you the king, we gave you the queen, we gave you the rooks. Those are the most high value pieces on the board. Who cares what the pawns are doing? But knowing where the pawns are on the board absolutely changes what kind of strategy you're going to do. So you're basically hiding those pieces and then trying to teach it chess. And I think that is sort of the state of the art right now. And so it's about helping globally understand the strategic option value of not just words, but interactions, and understanding how to put them into the context of all the board. So that's
right. Okay,
which is hard.
I got you. So we're playing in a sort of a narrow field of view when it comes to emotional or affective content, and we need to expose all that, which makes sense. If we want the machine to sort of understand us emotionally, then we need to let the machine have access to all the relevant information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So David, what about you? What do you think is hard about realizing some of this vision?
Well, I think it's very challenging for people who've been versed in traditional software development to get their arms around the kinds of tools that we're able to provide them now at a software architecture level. I think there's a degree of understanding and sophistication there that will emerge as people get more experience and the elements of the platform become clearer. So for me, it's, I think, very challenging for a developer to build an application framework in this area, because many of the key ingredients are still in flux in terms of how they're presented and how an application designer should really think about this crucial piece, which is, we called it user experience, user interaction. It's gone by a lot of names, but this is a very different dimension. This is where somebody with a formal training in psychology and linguistics needs to be part of the mix if you're really going to take advantage of what these tools are all about. And maybe there's a way of encapsulating that in the same way that some of the features that we've seen over time have been integrated into common software applications. But to me, that platform is still opaque, and the software development process doesn't yet have the right mechanisms to really integrate these kinds of breakthroughs as they happen. So to me, I'd love to see more investment in that area and more development around those kinds of potential roadblocks and bottlenecks in the process of bringing this stuff to market.
Okay, interesting, right? So that's on the sort of development side. What about, do either of you see issues on the deployment side? So, like, let's imagine that we get the right UX tools in place and the developers know how to use them. What about just deploying it and getting it out there? And, Scott, I know you mentioned a little bit ago that, people under 40, like, they're fine, their phones, they trust their phones, right? But are there other issues that either of you see in trying to get this to actually be adopted in practice?
To me,
Scott?
The one I see is, in AI, you cannot move fast and break things. And a lot of iterative development is about doing that. And understandably, that's the creative process. And in AI, there is the realistic danger of unforeseen consequences. And you need to be methodical about that. And so when you talk about deploying, you can't deploy a beta that, like, Microsoft Tay is the perfect example of that, right? Like, Microsoft Tay, from an algorithmic perspective, it's great. Tay was a Twitter chatbot that was really, really good. And it took a day for the internet to teach it to be a horrible, misogynistic, racist robot. And Microsoft didn't do anything wrong but tell people about it. And so I see that as a problem, is humans screwing it up. I'm not afraid of robots taking over the world. I'm afraid of humans screwing things up for the robots and us working together. Okay, excellent point. David, what about you from a deployment perspective?
Well, I have to echo that Scott's running a business in the area, so he knows those elements. But I can say that to my way of thinking, some of the biggest obstacles there are the potential abuses that I think people are seeing for these kinds of technologies, and I worry about that kind of artificially inducing a new kind of AI winter, which the market experienced long ago, when expectations and reality were divided, and that those kinds of things can occur here. So I hope that there is that right sensitivity to policy and the rollout of these things as we go forward, that there is an element of the ethicist is involved. Again, these are commercial issues. If you don't handle it correctly, you can paint yourself right into a corner from a market development point of view. So I'm hopeful. That's one of the risks I see out there to deployment.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because there's a lot of press these days about the ethical aspects of just face recognition, right? Just being able to recognize that you're David and you're Scott, much less being able to recognize your emotional content, maybe by sort of looking through the webcam, for example. So, great.
Google knows that too, right?
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. Okay. So now I want to dive just a little bit deeper with both of you, and I'll start with David, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about this from the perspective of an investor, right? So, do you have any anecdotes or learnings? Can you tell us about companies that are, potentially using emotion AI? Where is it successful today, right? You've got a different perspective than, say, Scott does. So from that lens of an investor, tell us some interesting stories.
Sure. Well, first I'll sketch out the landscape from our perspective, as you're saying, as an investor. What are we really looking for? I think I mentioned earlier the roadblocks and bottlenecks. They don't call it the dismal science for nothing on the economic side. We're looking for those things that are likely to impede the development of an overall market. You can see the enthusiasm and adoption of AI broadly defined. That's clear in the market, and yet there are these limitations that the practitioners are all keenly aware of. And so, from our perspective, we're looking for people who are bringing some new science into the market so that they can address some of those challenges, not by doing what they're doing today harder, but taking a different approach. And so in that case, and I'll use Cyrano as an example, and another company that we're involved with as a related example of really employing linguistics. So in a way, it's a little bit of what we used to call good old-fashioned AI coming to bear in combination with some of these amazing deep learning tools and generative networks and the kinds of things that we've learned how to do there, being able to bring some of those together where they're bringing a new technology into the mix to move us past a roadblock or a hurdle. So in our case, much of the value proposition is going to pivot as an investor on whether or not there is some protectable intellectual property available. So one of the things that we're looking for are occasionally the iconoclasts, the people who say, well, the reason they can't solve the problem is they're doing it wrong. If they were doing it correctly, they'd be able to solve the problem. And that's a case where I'll bring up another company, and Scott's spoken a bit around Cyrano. There's another company we're involved with called Pat.ai. And they're approaching kind of a different dimension of this, but gets to the heart of it, which is trying to understand the language independent meaning of text in particular. And that's useful for translation, but it's also essential for a programmer. Again, to that point earlier, how do I figure out what to do? What does this person really mean? It's one thing to be able to call on a set of statistical associations. It's another to combine that with enough linguistic understanding to really get your arms around that. And where a Cyrano comes into that same mix is that really figuring out the state of mind of the individual involves a number of other things. What's their communication strategy? What's their current frame of mind? Where are they in the process of either making a decision or in your case, becoming frustrated earlier, being able to understand, that time dependency. So systems that have within them the ability to keep a sequence so that they're able to build a time-based model. That's something that we're very intrigued by, and we're looking for systems that have those kinds of characteristics. And broadly, though, when we look at AI issues like machine translation, that's a roadblock because there are some limitations in the current technology that just are not going to be amenable. Trying harder isn't going to solve the problem. You're going to go from 78% accuracy to 84% accuracy. You're not going to get there. And so, to me, those are the things that I'm really intrigued by. And one of the things that's especially interesting about the Cyrano technology in particular, in my mind, is their ability to work from text. So that's really very interesting to me, and be able to determine things like communication strategy, as well as present state of mind, and therefore likely next action. Yeah. So the ability, now we're talking the language of marketeers and software developers. People know exactly what they want to do with those kinds of tools. And so to me, that's really where I'm looking for as an investor, because one of the things we know about these user interface elements is that they touch so many different application areas that I try to be very open-minded about the go-to-market strategy that somebody's chosen, the market that they've chosen to place their technology, and really looking for those foundational solutions to these roadblocks and trying to find the outlines of what that new platform is going to look like. And so again, that's where companies like Pat and Cyrano come into our mix as an investor because they have technologies that play in that area, as well as go-to-market strategies that are viable right now, where a small sliver of what's possible is a huge advantage because you can't do it at all right now using other things. And so that's what we're looking for, that practicality as well, that go-to-market dimension. And sometimes the more academic breakthroughs, that's where they'll run into some challenges of being able to take that step. So we want it all, being investors, in that we want that breakthrough. We want it to have some intellectual property protection, but we also want it grounded in real applications that people want to build today.
Okay, right. Okay, that's great. That makes a lot of sense to me. So Scott, let me turn to you then for a little bit of a deep dive. Really interesting journey, hypnotherapist. I'm sure lots of other stuff has happened in between, startup CEO. Just can you tell us a little bit more about your story and how Emotion AI came into play? And, in particular, how did you overcome some of the challenges around successfully building that into what you're doing at Cyrano?
So, like I said, the original impetus behind what we're doing is helping people at scale, right? My domain expertise, my career is 20,000 something hours of sitting one-on-one with a person, listening to them tell me what's right, what's wrong, where they need help. And I understand how to do that. And a lot of people know how to do that. And it's a job. And every one of us has listened to somebody in need in our lives. And even when we do our best, we're not great at it. And this touches on something that David said in his initial comments, actually. I will never forget the very first time I was talking with a client who was a 15-year-old girl who had just lost her virginity in a rape. It was a significantly more upsetting story than that, but just tragic. And I was sitting there, and I was fairly early in my career, and I remember sitting across from her thinking, "Oh my God, this girl needs real help," and then thinking to myself, "Oh my God, that's me," and in that moment, really wanting to do my best for her, and in that moment, thinking those things means I wasn't fully present with her. And so my empathy, my humanity, was getting in the way of my ability to be on the listening side of communication. And every word, every nuance, every subtlety in what she's saying in that moment is data, right? And that's conversational metadata that you and I absorb from people and process naturally. But we have all these filters that get in the way, like our thought processes, our internal monologues, our memories, our associations, our misconceptions, our bias, our whatever. We have all these different things that impede our ability to be fully present. And when you talk about the hypothetical idea of the perfect present guru, Buddha, sage kind of thing, it is a person who's completely attentive and without ego. And the promise to me of AI is an egoless audience. And having something that can honestly reflect back to you what's going on, I think that is a transformational opportunity. And when I saw that as a potential, not as a realistic or a feasible thing, but just as a vision, I said, if I can be part of building that without really even having done enough technical research to know what that even would entail, I said, that's got to be the goal. That's got to be the end game. That's got to be the thing. But then to get there, there's so many layers of subspecialty that have to go into it. And so we really, as a team, just said, okay, this is the one we can do. And there's wonderful companies like Pat. There's wonderful companies like Affectiva that's doing stuff on facial stuff with webcams. They're doing using the work, I think, of Paul Ekman, who is the guy who does all the micro gesture work, and brilliant stuff. But there are so many layers that are required to get there. we just said, okay, how can we make enough impact in one of those that eventually there can be some sort of roll up in the industry where hypothetically, Google buys, 7 companies and turns it into the thing that can do it. Because I think it's a pretty far stretch for any one company to be able to do enough to get, get past that uncanny valley. And so we just said, we can't, but we can do this one thing really well. We can be really, really good at listening and interpreting. And if that's what we can do, that'll be our contribution to this.
Okay, so just a couple of real quick follow-up questions. So are you optimistic about that roll-up of the 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 companies occurring? Or, I mean, do you think that there's enough, there are enough companies out there that are pursuing these technologies in different ways that Google might actually be able to buy them all and sort of build the thing?
I'm optimistic about it. Like, I mean, just the simple thing of transcription and attribution, like, which sounds like a fairly straightforward thing. Like, who's talking and what did they say? That's hard. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Right.
Especially with crosstalk and people talking over each other. It's a thing we completely take for granted that is important. And, it's a garbage in, garbage out thing. And I think there are enough companies that are starting to hit a bunch of these, Affectiva I just mentioned, but there's a few that are doing facial stuff. There's a bunch that are doing stuff on tonality and the waveform of the speech, and et cetera, et cetera. And all we need to do is have, the Gates Foundation just decide that they're going to throw $1 trillion at making personal computers personal. And I think that the incentive is there. And I think that there are enough creative people starting to tinker in the right sandboxes that, I'm optimistic.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to put my other question on hold just to kind of move us along a little bit. So last kind of question, and then we'll look and see if there's some questions from the audience. So just what's the future for emotion AI? Where do you think it's going to take hold successfully? And how is it going to change a business? So, just like thinking ahead, where's it going to go? Where's it going to work? And how are things going to change? So how about David? Can we start with you there?
Sure. I think we started down this road a little bit in the earlier remarks, but I see the real launch point for emotion AI is going to be in these customer service and sales type interactions. I think that's where there's a lot of money on the table there right now. I think that the future growth, though, around some of the concepts that Scott has laid out are really going to be fascinating, where we're seeing the development of simulated human interaction that's more multisensory and more ultimately more sophisticated. And so to me, that's where I think that there'll be some real immediate commercial advances will be in areas where people are able to do that kind of integration and pull those sorts of different systems into synthetic video experiences that capture the dynamics of an experience and can then synthetically create them in a way that's really satisfying within a limited context. So to me, that's where I think we're going to see a progression of growth. I'd love to see us applying it more in the kind of healthcare scenarios as well. I mean, Scott alluded to one segment of them. There's a somewhat broader set of questions around adherence, broadly the degree to which people really follow the doctor's instructions, and being able to have constant interaction with people is one area where you're able to really address that. And it's I think there'll be some very interesting applications in that space, because the costs that we're experiencing in our healthcare system now are so extreme, and now the recognition on the part of some of the payers that it does pay. If you put money in the bucket of providing some of these kinds of technical solutions to some of these issues, you are going to see a return economically on it. So I think that the broader space that Scott's alluding to is another area where we're very likely to see some near-term applications and near-term near-term growth. I personally would love to see more gaming experiences that had these kinds of realistic elements in them. I think that will be a way of addressing some of the limitations that we see now, and some of the areas where the gaming markets might have tapped themselves out. I think opening up a new creative vein there will, again, that'll reintroduce growth into some of those markets, is my sense as well.
Okay, thanks. What about you, Scott? What about the future?
I agree that right now B2B is where it's going to get going. You know, call centers, sales and customer support. I think that is the first place. I agree with a lot of what David just said. Just to add to it, I think ultimately you get to a B2C place where you have a Google Assistant, Siri, or something like that has the ability to curate information and know when to tell you the right thing. You know, in my clinic, I had at one time a really great assistant and another time a not at all great assistant. And really, it was not about their organizational skills. It was about their soft skills that make all the difference. And, you know, Google is very organized. The calendar works every time. But the ability for the system to understand what to tell me and when and how to tell me these things based on what's going on in my life, that is a thing that will be wonderfully invisible. And when technology can be invisible and just kind of improve things, that's when you get that adoption. So while I agree with everything David just said about the sort of enterprise side of where the short and midterm is going to be, I think the vision of that is exciting.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you both. So that was sort of the end of my questions. Although we've got some questions from the audience, and I'd like to kind of throw those out to you. Interestingly, the first two are about predicting the future. So the first one, which I think is a great question, is how far out are we from having a general AI feeling chatbot experience? So let me sort of modify that a little bit. I think we all agree chatbots are not awesome for the most part, right? So at like how far away are we from having a chatbot where we go, oh, that was pretty good. Like, it didn't make me mad. Again, I get angry at technology, but like, how far out are we from that?
I think chatbots are doing what they were intended to be. As frustrating as they are cost-effective, frequently asked question interfaces. And that's all. Like, you get the Richard Sozers and the Lex Friedmans, and you get these thought leaders that kind of push in that direction. And I think that there's market forces that want AI chatbots to be. Sorry, now my Slack is going. See, I told it to pause and it didn't. Sorry, let me make that really quiet. Forgive me. To have an interactive system that can feign and not be truly, general AI or anything like that, but that can be synthetic enough. I think once you get into synthetic data and GANs, you can get something that's going to get you there. So 2 years before you have something that's really deployable and enjoyable. I mean, Replica is doing an okay job right now, and that's pretty on rails. Okay. So that's my answer.
Okay. All right, we got 2 years. David, what about you?
Well, so Scott's the entrepreneur, I'm the investor. I'll just straight up double that and say 4.
Okay. Right. 4 years. All right, that's fair, right? Yeah. Okay. That's a good answer. Now, interestingly, the next question up was asking about the thing that you alluded to, Scott, which is, what about sort of full-on AI? You can even just give us best guess. We
so far.
Okay.
Like, yeah, long time.
Okay, David, you want to make any guesses? Twice a long time.
I think shortly after we have general purpose quantum computers, something like that. Some point in the future in which there's been a massive technological breakthrough which solves currently completely imponderable problems we can't even properly frame, because what's consciousness again? Just give equations for that and I'll compute them right away. We don't know enough about those questions, I think, to really get to the bottom of them. I think there are AIs, some of them already have scary characteristics. We were talking about face recognition systems that rapidly correlate with diverse databases. That's already pretty scary if you want to go down the world of general purpose AI. That's pretty general if the problem is, who's that? Right? So I think this problem is going to end up solved in a very different way. I think maybe we'll be shocked and surprised, but so far, I'll see it on the horizon.
All right,
that's my answer to post-quantum computing. I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Sort of quantum supremacy, right? Like we've got a quantum computer that can just do things that are impossible today.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So the last question that's up here, I think, is a really good and timely one, and it's basically asking: is there anything available today that can help make online discussions and meetings as rich as the in-person ones, right? Because we all have had the experience where there's a loss of information that occurs in a setting like this from a lot of sources. So, what is there, right? Are there tools that are becoming available? And, David, you could talk about it from, companies that you know of, or Scott, you too. Are there things that can help us doing this kind of interaction?
Mine. I'll sales pitch this. Forgive me.
Right.
I wouldn't do that if it wasn't a direct answer. We genuinely pivoted from COVID, built a Zoom tool, and made it very affordable. And what it does is it takes a Zoom conversation, any conversations that's recorded, so it only works when the call is recorded, takes that transcript, runs it through a system, and then automatically sends an email report to the host of the call about each person on the call, what their psychographic makeup is, how to have a long-term relationship with the person. So it's not just about transactions, it's their commitment level, but it's also about how to work better with this person. So we do it on that side. I mentioned Affectiva. They're on the verge of doing some of that stuff as well. I don't know what their B2C deployments are, though. Right.
Okay. David, any thoughts on that?
Sure. I can share some things that I learned from my, as I described, running an internet communications company. We ran into a bunch of these challenges. And there's a couple things I point to. One is to recognize that there's very much a spectrum of, there's a bell curve spectrum of amongst people regarding their need for the kind of direct feedback, especially watching other people's faces. Some people, they're not all salespeople, but a lot of salespeople are on one end, and a lot of engineers, they're not all engineers, are on the other, and they don't readily understand each other. So the first thing I would say to anybody is to realize other people using the system have a very different outlook than you. And the other is to be sure that when you're trying to work together, especially, that you have something visual other than the video to look at. We aren't good as people at managing a soundstage and getting our lighting and getting our cameras right. And then you have to be careful not to move too much and do a bunch of other very distracting things. So it's helpful to have a time when you turn the video off and look at the presentation, look at the co-work, and give everybody a break, because video is great, but it's also tiring. It's its own activity, actually.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we're sort of running a little bit long. I guess what I would suggest is maybe we could wrap at this point. Does that sound okay with you guys?
Sure. Great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So again, super interesting discussion. I really appreciate our panelists for being here, and for the people in the audience, and for the great questions that we got. Those were fantastic. And just remember that you can go back and watch this after the fact. It was recorded. And there are some additional materials that are linked in our Bright Talk channel. So again, David and Scott, really appreciate the time with you today.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, we will talk to you later.